What's up, Nutrition Heroes? It's Dr. Brad. Glad to be back. I've been away for a minute, and you are listening to the next episode of the Nutrition Hero Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad to be here. Today's episode is sponsored by Categorizing. Categorizing are the makers of a product called Categorizing Prime. Burning fat for fuel is the point. It's essentially exogenous ketones inducing ketosis. And they have a few patents that they utilize in the technology. And so one of the things that I thought I'd do is try this stuff out. I'm never going to talk about something unless I've tried it myself, if you know what I mean. And so anyway, been using this product for about the last 60 days. And I got to tell you, it is like jet fuel for the brain. Phenomenal. And I've been using it with some patients here and there. And whether it be for weight loss, focus, energy, whatever it might be for the patient. One of the things that I have noticed for myself is the focus, the ability to take in information, to synthesize it, to get that information back out in an intelligible format. And I got to tell you, I've been very, very happy with it. So Categorizing Prime, they have a discount that they're offering for everybody today if you would like. You can follow the link in the podcast notes below. You can read about it on their website. They've been featured in the Tim Ferriss podcast. Also in his latest bestseller called Tools of Titans. It's been featured on the Joe Rogan podcast. It's been featured on TED Talks. Many myriad of magazines, as you can imagine. So anyway, they have made the rounds, and here they are on the Nutrition Hero podcast. So thank you to Categorizing for offering the discount. And just follow the link in the podcast notes below, or you can use the code AHAV at checkout. AHAV means love for those of you that are unfamiliar. AHAV at checkout, and you can take advantage of the offer that they are giving you here. I will tell you, the best tasting is orange. The best tasting. It's powder that you put in water, 8 to 10 ounces of water down the hatch at breakfast, and see how your day goes. I'm saying that with a smile because I already know what you're going to say. So all right, pretty cool. Anyway, thank you to Categorizing for sponsoring the podcast episode today. We appreciate it. All right, let's get to the topic at hand. And I am very excited about this today. I'm so excited about this because it's information that I haven't shared except maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years. And it's information that's going to actually change somebody's life in your world today, all right? It's gonna change, and maybe the reason I haven't shared it is you always got to have a card in your back pocket, right? Like the ace of spades, you always got to keep the ace of spades. It's a thing that separates you from the clinic down the street, whatever it might be. But I'm starting to see this topic in the educational marketplace a little bit more frequently right now, which is cool. And if that's happening, you might as well hear about it on the Nutrition Hero podcast and let that be your source. So all right, so anyway, grab a pen. I legit want you to write this stuff down because I don't know that you're going to find it in this context, delivered in this way, anywhere else. So I'll do my very best for you today. So we're going to talk about 3 symptoms that walk into a functional medicine clinic on a daily basis, and those symptoms are depression, blood pressure, and fatigue. Depression, blood pressure, and fatigue. And those 3 things are typically going to walk in with some level of chronic disease attached to them. And so you might see that with thyroid disease or diabetes, whatever it is, right? In a traditional medical setting, it's looked at as 3 different symptoms. And in a functional medicine setting, it's also looked at as 3 different symptoms. And the reason is that most traditional medical providers have it on lockdown when it comes to endocrinology. They know all about it. Immunology, most people know something about it. And in a functional medicine world, endocrinology and immunology are the 2 things that are most often schooled. And so those are the lenses that you look at the world through. Today, I'm going to ask you to put on a different pair of glasses. We're going to look at these 3 symptoms through genetics. And we're going to look at them through basically genetic expression of enzymes. And so these 3 symptoms are related, and I'm going to show you how. But you got to promise that you're actually going to use it. And you got to promise me, right, that you're going to keep this information sacred. You're going to keep this information to yourself in a way that I want you to demonstrate it in your clinical life first before you go and start teaching other people about it, because it takes some skill level to apply the research, number one, but it takes some skill level to apply like the clinical applications, like being able to look at somebody and say, you have a genetic issue, and then you test for the genetic issue, and then you find it and you say, told you, here's what you're going to do with it, right? You can't just take everybody that has high blood pressure and everybody that has fatigue and depression. You can't just take them all and be like, this is what I do for high blood pressure, fatigue, and depression, because that's not how it works. Sometimes legitimately they are 3 different issues, and sometimes legitimately they are endocrinology issues or inflammatory problems. But what I'm saying right now is that when you go through a treatment plan with somebody and they're still not off their blood pressure medication, the question is why? They're still not in a spot where the medical doctor has removed them from SSRIs. The question is, how come? What in the world? Right? You are a functional medicine provider. You have like this amazing toolbox to use. How come it's not working? Right? What about fatigue? You get somebody moving in the right direction, they lost some body weight, their blood sugars are balanced, they're off of medication as per their medical doctor's prescriptions, and what in the world? They're still dealing with fatigue on a daily basis. That's not normal. Early on in my career, I would basically you wash your hands and you go, well, I did my best. But the point is that there's got to be some resolution for these people as well. You can't just like mail it in and be like, well, that's all we got. So what's been happening later on in my career here is patients that have gone through the functional medicine realm of approach, they end up in my clinic. And they end up after they've seen 2, 3, 4 different doctors. And the question is why? What are they missing? And so you look at the notes, you look at the supplements they've used, and the doctors all are doing, for the most part, what they should, right? They're doing a good job from an endocrinology perspective, from an inflammatory perspective. And so I'm going to layer some information in here for you today that has an approach on how to look at high blood pressure, fatigue, and depression from a genetic perspective, because this is something that, again, it's not every case, but you are going to find is very applicable and allows you to hit a home run with patients as they walk in the door. How do we start this? Let's look at, let's just go back to the beginning and let's talk about neurotransmitters first of all. So let's start with maybe depression. So your body gets, in your diet, you get all of these different amino acids that are building blocks that create stuff in the body. Like you're going to make proteins out of them, you're going to make enzymes out of them, you're going to make whatever it is. Well, in this instance, we're going to talk about things like phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, and arginine. Your body takes these building blocks and you begin to create neurotransmitters out of them, like dopamine, serotonin, melatonin. You create things like epinephrine, norepinephrine. You create things like nitric oxide that we talked about a few weeks ago with Dr. Nathan Bryan, who I very much appreciated being on the podcast. These are the things that we make out of amino acids, and these amino acids are very important. So in functional medicine world, been trained, it's been beat into everybody's heads like, hey, you need to make sure your patients are getting a broad spectrum of a complete profile of amino acids, and it works well, right? You can fix a very large percentage of people's problems by giving them more building blocks. They have what we call trophic issues, where they're just not getting the right nutrients to build the right structures. Well, give them the nutrients, the body builds the structures, and the world is great. That's the world we're coming from. And what I want to do is I want to look at the genes today that code for the enzymes. So the genes take the amino acids, they code for the enzymes in the physiological realm here, dealing with high blood pressure, depression, and fatigue. We're going to start with four different chemicals specifically, and I actually want you to write this stuff down because we're going to talk about how we map out these symptoms. So phenylalanine is an amino acid that gets basically turned into tyrosine. There's an enzyme called PAH that turns it into tyrosine. Tyrosine is going to be utilized into L-DOPA. So L-DOPA. L-DOPA turns into everybody's favorite thing, dopamine, right? Which gets funneled into norepinephrine and then epinephrine. So we just went from phenylalanine to epinephrine. Tyrosine, L-DOPA, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. Epinephrine, adrenaline, people. What about tryptophan? Tryptophan, we can turn into 5-HTP. We have an enzymatic reaction that allows that to take place. 5-HTP funnels its way down into serotonin. Serotonin funnels its way down into melatonin. So these are the pathways that we're talking about here today. And then we have endothelial nitric oxide synthase, taking arginine and turning it into nitric oxide, right? Which is cool. And I think citrulline as well. Don't quote me on that. We take these amino acids and we see the byproducts, or the end products, I should say, of these: dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, serotonin, melatonin, and nitric oxide. This is cool because these are the places that a primary medical physician is going to look for these symptoms, okay? Maybe not high blood pressure, but definitely for depression, right? SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So if we're looking at a patient that walks into the clinic and they're on SSRIs, they're on 3 different blood pressure medications, and they're like, "Doctor, I'm just tired. I'm just tired all the time." What I want you to do is I want you to think about this pathway that we just laid out. There is something in this pathway that needs to be looked at. So all of the different enzymes that are coded for here, all of the different enzymes, and there's a bunch of them, they require a building block and they require a cofactor. Does that make sense? A building block and a cofactor. The building block plus the cofactor equates to the end product. So there's a cofactor required in each of the pathways that I just mentioned. A cofactor that I have not heard presented in a functional medicine situation, in a functional medicine light. I haven't heard this in a long time, just until recently through a doctor named Dr. Ben Lynch. And he did a very good job at presenting this information. But it's called biopterin. It's a cofactor, biopterin, biopterin. It's a cofactor for neurotransmitter production. It's a cofactor for nitric oxide production, biopterin. Biopterin is awesome because biopterin levels, they allow you to facilitate taking tryptophan and turning it into 5-HTP so that you can make serotonin. Biopterin is awesome because it allows you to take tyrosine, turn it into L-dopa so you can make dopamine. And without dopamine, you don't get epinephrine. Without epinephrine, you don't get the lights coming on in the beginning of the day. So what happens is we have this cofactor, biopterin, labeled BH4, by the way, and this cofactor is very sensitive to your physiology. Very, very sensitive to your physiology. Now, this cofactor, biopterin, your body doesn't harbor very much of it. You don't harbor very much of it. You create it, but it's a very sensitive, essential cofactor. And what is it sensitive to? It's sensitive to toxin buildup. It's sensitive to toxin buildup. And specifically, you can create toxicity of stress hormone that's going to affect it. You can create toxicity to things like cigarettes will do it every single day, but also just like chemical toxicity. In previous episodes, we talked about running organic acid tests, etc. And when you look at the organic acid profiles or the toxicity profiles that happen in urine, you're measuring toxic buildup or the level of detoxification that your body is participating in. And so one of the reasons why patients can be toxic is obviously too much toxin in their lifestyle, right? That's one thing, right? But let's say they live a perfect lifestyle. They're minimizing their toxic risk exposure. And what's another reason for toxin buildup in the body? Decreased transsulfuration pathway activity. This would be like decreased glutathione production, decreased glutathione utilization, right? So maybe they have a genetic disposition where they don't have, there's 2 genes that break glutathione down into an active form, like they oxidize it and then reduce it and then oxidize it and reduce it. There's 2 genes that do this. And what if you have a genetic predisposition where those genes are downregulated, okay, where you're just a bad detoxifier? You're going to create a toxic situation even though you eat good food, you take your supplementation, and you're not huffing exhaust out of the back of your car on a daily basis. You're mercury free as far as your mouth is concerned. You're not drinking out of plastic. You're doing all the things you know how to do. Yet you have a genetic predisposition for having decreased ability to detoxify. A third enzyme I'm going to throw in there. So we talk about glutathione has 2 pathways for oxidizing glutathione, right? If those 2 pathways are broken, it's going to be an issue. Let's say we have another one, superoxide dismutase, SOD. Well, that's a hero in functional medicine. SOD. It's in products from multiple different companies that you have access to in your clinic. SOD. And it's something that is looked at as being very, very important for patients that are dealing with depression, anxiety, thyroid disease, all of that. Why is it so important? Because superoxide dismutase takes care of something called superoxide. Superoxide. Superoxide is produced. I want you to write this down. If you're driving your car, stop right now. Superoxide is produced by endothelial nitric oxide synthase. The same enzyme that produces nitric oxide. This is so important here. So biopterin goes down when your glutathione utilization goes down. Biopterin goes down when superoxide is present. Now, if we have these three genes, or these three genes that are coding enzymes that allow you to detoxify, so the 2-glutathione pathway and then superoxide dismutase, if you're not producing enough activity genetically in these detoxification profiles, you are having decreased, I don't care who you are having decreased biopterin. If you have decreased levels of biopterin in the body, you are going to have symptoms. Your symptoms will be blood pressure related, diabetic issues, endothelial dysfunction is what I'm talking about. Your symptoms will be depression based, maybe anxiety based. Your symptoms will be fatigue based. Biopterin is that important. Biopterin is so important that the medical community right now, the prescription that exists, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head here, but the prescription that is utilized in the medical community to bring biopterin levels up is $100,000 a year. $100,000 a year. It's patented, so some company patented it, and they have the patent until 2024, and they're making a killing off of it. $100,000 a year. Now the patient doesn't pay $100,000 a year because the insurance companies are there. But the point is that the BH4 value in your body is so important that an insurance company can charge $100,000 a year for a pill. It's wild. That's stunning to me, because if you can work backwards, you can figure out how to increase the BH4 levels, the biopterin levels, by looking at genetic detoxification profiles. This is so cool. Genetic detoxification profiles. It's something that you have access to. It's not just something that's special for doctors that are in the know, right? You have access to this stuff. The best one that I've found is you just get a 23andMe test done at 23andme.com and then submit it to a genetic profiling company, and they give you, the breakdowns here. And it's cool. Maybe we'll do a whole podcast on that, coming up. But the point is that when you have a biopterin-based symptom, okay, we're going to label it now. So high blood pressure, depression, and fatigue can be biopterin-based symptoms. So if you see them come in all at the same time in one person, the person's on an SSRI, or they talk about, I just take 5-HTP every day, whatever. Or they're on 1, 2, 3, 4 different blood pressure medications, and they're fatigued. They have to drink coffee on a daily basis just to keep the lights on. I'm telling you, biopterin is a key player in that patient. Biopterin. So I'm going to spell it one more time because I want you to write this down. Biopterin, biopterin. Now, the problem with this is that biopterin is super sensitive to the toxicity levels that your body is participating with. Things like folic acid are going to lower your biopterin immensely. Things like mercury toxicities, plastics, biological chemicals that are used in farming. It could be gases that are given off as engine byproducts. These things are going to decrease biopterin levels, and you cannot take amino acids and turn them into neurotransmitters or nitric oxide without biopterin. So that's so important to make sure that we're talking about there. All right. So now let's take blood pressure. We're going to separate these three things, these three symptoms, into their own categories now. So biopterin is super important. You got it. Hopefully I don't mean to beat a dead horse here. But arginine and biopterin are required for nitric oxide production. When you have arginine and biopterin together, you produce nitric oxide. When you take arginine by itself and you're low on biopterin, you create superoxide. Let me say that again in a different way. When you're low on biopterin, but you're taking an arginine-based supplement for blood pressure regulation, you create superoxide. That's like lighting a match inside of a gas can for anybody that has diabetes, heart disease, increased aging, like wrinkles that they don't want, stroke, neuropathy, anything. Any of those things dealing with superoxide. If you take an arginine-based blood pressure support product or erectile dysfunction product and you don't have enough BH4 to mash together, you are not creating nitric oxide, you are creating a problem. That is so important. And so patients that have come into the practice, and they're like, well, I used to use arginine for erectile dysfunction and it worked for a few weeks or a few months and now it doesn't work anymore and I got this numbness and tingling in my feet. What's going on? Hey, you're low on biopterin. It's $100,000 a year, pharmaceutically to sort that out, or we can look at your detoxification profiles and figure out how to fix those. I love it. It's super cool. Okay, so that's why it's a bad idea for your patients to take arginine all by itself when you don't know their biopterin levels. That's why it's bad for your patients to take arginine as you get it from a pre-workout situation. I found this out on myself actually back in the day. You go through college and you're taking a pre-workout supplement, it has loaded with arginine, right? And you get good workouts with it, good results, and then all of a sudden it stops working. You start getting headaches. You start getting sick. You start getting decreased kidney function with it. Well, how come? Because you're expending so much biopterin that now all that's left is arginine, and your enos system is creating superoxide with it, and superoxide is a killer. This is so important for your blood pressure patients. If they're on 2, 3, 4 different blood pressure medications, they're taking whatever supplements they can find to try to downregulate the blood pressure situation. It is biopterin. It is a toxic situation. It may not be because they have too much toxin. It may be because they're a slow detoxifier. So super cool to find this stuff out. So anyway, moving on here. Let's talk about tryptophan and serotonin. So we're talking about depression, maybe some anxiety situations for people, things that don't allow them to sleep. In order to take tryptophan and turn it into 5-HTP, you need biopterin. That's not rocket science, but that's important to know. You need it, BH4. Now, what's happening then when you're dealing with a patient that is just taking 5-HTP and loading it down the funnel here towards serotonin and melatonin? Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it doesn't help. If it doesn't help, you have to think probably not a biopterin problem. Okay, so this is one of the ways that you can figure out for your patients if their symptoms are biopterin related. It's using 5-HTP. So if they come into your clinic with blood pressure that's too high and they're on SSRIs, or maybe they're just depressed, right? Or maybe they can't sleep at night, the melatonin issue. One of the things that you can do is you can use 5-HTP. If 5-HTP fixes the sleeping problem, or if 5-HTP helps support their symptomology by the depression symptoms, if they start to feel a little bit better, feel a little different, right, in a good way, that is telling you that you may have a biopterin deficiency. So that's a clinical pearl there, and I'll highlight that here again when we're done, but I want to put that on the table as we talk about fatigue. One of the things that can happen with fatigue is your patients can develop a resistance to epinephrine, right? Why? Because they're not creating enough of their own, so they just take caffeine, and we use a stimulant that is basically doing the same thing as epinephrine over and over and over again, and we're in this fight or flight situation, and we're developing epinephrine resistance. Tyrosine, to turn into L-DOPA, you need biopterin. Tyrosine into L-DOPA, you need biopterin. This is important because L-DOPA is going to turn into dopamine, dopamine into epinephrine, dopamine into epinephrine. Now, on an organic acid test, one of the ways that we would analyze this is we would look at the end products of epinephrine metabolization, VMA, vanillyl manilic acid. Okay, on an organic acid test, you're also going to look at the end product of dopamine production, which is HVA. So if you have an HVA and a VMA situation, if the ratio between the two, if it's high, which measures automatically on an organic acid test, okay, HVA to VMA, if it's a high ratio, that tells you your patient may be stuck in a fight or flight mechanism. If they're stuck in a fight or flight mechanism, that is a very strong indicator that they could be dealing with a biopterin deficiency. If you're listening to this going, what in the heck is this guy talking about? Go back and listen to the organic acid testing podcast, all right? Go back and listen to that. Or better yet, run an organic acid test on yourself. That would be important. Just make sure that you're analyzing this stuff. So these are 3 different ways of looking at your biopterin values. So here's the clinical case again. Patient walks in the door, they have high blood pressure, depression, and they're fatigued. One of the ways you can sort this out if it's a biopterin situation is just by giving them 5-HTP. If you give them 5-HTP, and all of a sudden they're sleeping better, they're starting to feel a little different from a symptom perspective related to signs of depression, they're dealing with a biopterin situation, okay? Because you skipped biopterin and gave them 5-HTP and the world's a better place. Well, that tells you something. That tells you that they're likely also dealing with a biopterin-related blood pressure issue. They're also dealing with likely a biopterin-related fight or flight issue. This is awesome. This is a genetic situation. So when you see that, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are figuring out their genetic detoxification profile. If you give somebody glutathione that cannot break glutathione down, you are going to see that as an elevated GGT on their blood chemistry. If they have the genetic predisposition, like I said before, where they're not detoxifying appropriately and you give them glutathione, you're going to see an elevated GGT on the blood chemistry. That's a sign this patient has a biopterin problem. That's a sign. So you look at a patient who doesn't drink alcohol and their GGT is elevated, their triglycerides are fairly normal, and you go, what in the world? Ding, 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 red flag, biopterin. You want to consider that as being part of the mechanistic approach that you have to helping them reverse their condition. Anyway, hopefully this is all making sense, because essentially what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to help people bring some logic and resolution to a situation where they're just taking a myriad of pills to cover up the metabolic pathways that are dysfunctioning. So let me give you a clinical case here. Let's say you have a 58-year-old lady that has Hashimoto's. She has a mouthful of mercury amalgams. She's on metformin, glipizide, and Lantus. She's also taking simvastatin. We're taking 3 different blood pressure and water pills. And we're also looking at Synthroid. And what else? SSRI. And we'll call that good for right now. And a sleeping medication. So we're taking this litany of medications, 12, 13 different medications, which is not out of the question when you're talking about somebody that has an autoimmune condition, most likely, and some genetic issues that nobody's looking at. So the lady comes into your practice, and the lady says, hey, doctor, I've been dealing with these things. These are all my medications. Even before you go in and you talk to that lady, and you're reading through her paperwork, you should be able to start putting together some thought process along the lines of, well, you're on Synthroid. Synthroid has been shown to cause SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth situation. If you have SIBO, you're probably dealing with some level of decreased ability to create serotonin, which would make sense for the SSRI, because most of the serotonin your body makes is going to be in the gut. So this is how you're breaking down the thought process here. If you have a distorted ecology in your belly right now, then the potential that you're dealing with, detoxification issues is very high, especially considering that you have the mercury amalgams. Now we also look at the metabolic issues that are going along with this. If the body is down-regulating the metabolism, because it does not want to have a worse detoxification situation to go after, then what happens is you're going to have your blood sugar go up. And the doctor puts you on the blood sugar, wedges more glucose through Krebs cycle, creating more reactive oxygen species that the body can't get rid of. Again, so you're just mapping this out in your head, and looking at it and saying, now the patient doesn't feel well, they're depressed, they have gut issues, they're on medication for blood sugar that's not helping because the brain is fighting the mechanism. And here we are looking at this patient that is fatigued, and they're looking at you going, doctor, help me. We have all of this information. What are we going to do? Clearly, you want to downregulate inflammation as much as you possibly can. Clearly, you want to do that first and foremost. So maybe you support detoxification pathways. Maybe you support with superoxide dismutase. Maybe you support with glutathione. GGT is normal on their blood chemistry. You support their detoxification pathways and all this stuff goes on. And you get them to lose a little bit of weight. They're feeling better. The blood sugar's coming down because you changed their food a little bit. And it's awesome. Right? They're happy. You're happy. You look at their follow-up blood chemistry and their GGT is at 240. And you go, what in the heck? That shouldn't happen. The reason we're talking about this, by the way, is I saw it twice this week, and it's Wednesday. So GGT is 240, and you go, oh, okay. They probably cannot genetically detoxify with glutathione, even though you need glutathione, right? By the way, you need superoxide dismutase in order for the enzymes that detox your body with glutathione to work. So if we have a genetic predisposition where none of those are functioning appropriately, boom, you're in trouble. GGT goes up, you see it on the follow-up, and you go, oh, all right, so the reason this patient's been getting 30% better instead of 100% better is because I've been helping them decrease inflammation, which is helpful and allows BH4 biopterin values to return to normal, but I have not done it well enough because I've been working with them from an inflammatory, like an immune and endocrinology perspective, not an immune, endocrinology, and genetic perspective. So we're coming full circle here in the conversation because we want to make sure that your patients have a physician, a doctor, a nutritionist, whatever you are, a health coach, to look at their condition, all right, the state of their body, from as many different perspectives as possible. I cannot stress this enough that the genetic profile testing is so important. It's so important. It gives you the opportunity to help your patients in a way that nobody else will. So, what do you do for this patient? What do we do for them? We're going to support these pathways. If they can't detoxify using glutathione, then do you think I'm going to give them glutathione? No, we're not going to give them glutathione. We're not going to overwhelm them with glutathione if they can't detoxify with it. We're going to give them superoxide dismutase. Yes, that's imperative. We're going to support the other ingredients, I shouldn't say ingredients, the other chemicals that support phase 1 and 2 liver detoxification mechanisms. We're going to do that. We're going to methylate the heck out of this patient. Okay, we're going to get rid of folic acid out of their diet. We're going to make sure that some dentist takes care of the mercury situation in their mouth. We're going to make sure that this patient is walking instead of running, for exercise. We're going to make sure that this patient is utilizing infrared saunas. We're going to make sure that this patient can decrease their toxic load as much as possible so their biopterin levels come up so that they can start creating these chemicals, these neurotransmitters and hormones appropriately again. We're going to make sure that we do not let them have any arginine until their biopterin levels return to normal. We're going to make sure of it. All right, if 5-HTP helps you, you probably have a biopterin problem. This is information that I want you to read about. You can't just listen to what I say and then go out and do it because you got to know the ins and outs, like the pathways. The best way that I found in order to utilize this from a commercial perspective is Dr. Ben Lynch's program that he has where you could submit a raw data file from a 23andMe and he gives you the metabolic pathways, the DNA pathways here, and it's awesome. It's ridiculous. It's phenomenal. Go to his website and get his book called Dirty Genes and just listen to a couple of the courses that he has on there. It's not expensive, all right? But it's a way for you to increase your education in the realm of DNA and genetics that gives you an opportunity to serve your patients in a way that literally you're not doing right now and nobody else in your community is. So I'll include a link for that. Get his book, get some of the webinars that he has regarding this stuff, and it's going to change your life, right? It's going to change your patient's life. Do that. Just handle it. Maybe I'll have a couple of links here. So 23andMe, and then take the raw data and submit it, to Dr. Lynch's program here. It's called Strategene. It does an awesome job. want to make sure that you get the heart of the matter today. Today was all about biopterin. And put on your DNA glasses instead of just your hormone glasses, and instead of your white blood cell glasses, and let's look at your patients through a different lens. And I know that it's going to serve some of your patients in the coming weeks here. It's going to help somebody, but biopterin is key. Biopterin is key. Thank you for listening to the Nutrition Hero podcast. Follow the link in the podcast notes below, and take care of your education the rest of the way here. Bless you, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Nutrition Hero podcast. Enjoy.